الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته ثم الصلاة والسلام على حبيبه وصفيه الذي أرسله رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who made praise the key for his remembrance, a mean for increase of his bounty and a guide to his majesty. We convey our greeting and salutation to the Holy Prophet of Islam and his pure progenies. Assalamu alayka ya Abu Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifina'ik. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Sisters and brothers, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يقول الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. O people, reverence your Lord who created you from a single soul and from it created its mate, and from the two has spread the multitude of people around. Surah Nisa, verse number 1. This is being the last of our series of program for Muharram this year. I would like, as I indicated last night, I would like to focus, because the conceptual theme that ran through the whole program was the relationship between Ashura and the return of Imam al-Asr, Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-sharif. So today I want to focus, normally the last day of in Ashura, any lecture that takes place on the 10th day is going to be dedicated to Sayyida Zainab salamullah alayha, because within the early part of the 10th day of Muharram, by a couple of hours after noon, the martyrdom of everyone is complete, and the transition takes place where now Sayyida Zainab has to take responsibility and take the rest of the message straight to its completion. I want to use that and move from the role of women in Ashura and look at the role of women once, inshallah, it takes place in the revolution or revolt or the coming of Imam al-Mahdi ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-sharif. But before I do that, there is something which I want, as usual, a recap of previous nights. I pointed out during the past couple of nights that we really have a responsibility as Shias to take the message of Ashura and move it beyond our circle, the circle of the Shia, to the outer world, ultimately to the community at large. And whether we do it based on the love for the Qurba, or whether we do it because they are Imam, or whether we do it because we have an obligation to follow the path that has been designed by Ahlul Bayt, two fundamental principles we must pay attention to. Number one, the socio-political dynamic of the society that we are in. Without understanding that dynamic, we cannot craft some kind of a strategy to take Ashura, the messages of Ashura, beyond the historical, cultural concepts to the community at large. And number two was to understand wholly the life of our Imams. Without understanding these two, it becomes problematic. We will not be able to do anything. Today, I want to focus, we understand, everyone who has read about Ashura understands the role that women played, not only in the developmental part of Ashura, but after the event in Karbala and beyond. Technically, one could use the metaphor of a flag that Imam Hussein salawatullah salam alayhi carried until the last minute of his life, and that flag was given to Sayyida Zainab to take it right to the heart of Bani Umayyah, where the goal of the uprising was to expose Bani Umayyah as they are to their own community and initiate some kind of revolt against them, that up to that point people were not prepared to accept that they really have a responsibility to stand up to injustice and tyranny. I don't want to spend too much time because literature available, huge number of articles, essays, books have been written about this in conferences that have been organized. I want to go and focus on the issue of the role of women primarily and the coming of the return of our living Imam. What would be the role of women then? But before I do that, there's something that I need to address. During the past 4 or 5 decades, from late 1970s, beginning of 1980s up to now, huge amount of literature appeared in social science and gender studies in the West, assessing or mapping plight of Muslim women in the Muslim countries. That was the title of the research and papers. Unfortunately, because Western understanding of Muslim women primarily remains influenced by a single region, Middle East and a little bit North Africa, the result of this scholarship has been extremely one-sided, influenced by primarily Arab culture. And even within the Arab culture, the Saudis and few others, rather than understand the diversity and the multiplicity that exist in the Muslim world vis-a-vis the role of women. What these scholars have not realized that Middle East and North Africa only contains 20% of the Muslim world. 80% of the Muslim world are outside what we call the Middle East or Arab countries, where Arabic is spoken. And because of this, the stereotype has been created that Muslim women are somehow oppressed. There is a hierarchy existing, etc., etc. But, and out of this this study came a question that Muslim scholars had to address. Is Islam inherently deeply prejudiced and against women or not? Because they have been extremely selective in the way they presented. So this question came up, the issue of misogynistic nature of Islam vis-a-vis women. Unfortunately, when this kind of label was when Islam was labeled with this kind of negative kind of label, the Muslims began to respond, but the way they responded was not properly structured. Number one, they were apologistic that they said, no, there is nothing to do with Islam, it is purely culture. So, and there were others who said, no, it is deeply rooted within Islam, and the only way we can come out of it is to go for secular approach that will liberate women from the crisis that they are in. None of these were able to deliver properly the answer to the question. The answer still remains. If you today look at a number of scholarship regarding women in Islam, and particularly in the Quran, they have selected a number of verses in the Holy Quran that constantly focus upon it. Nobody came to look in depth in the right of women in Islam and the position of women in Islam in the Quran and Ahadith. If we do that, we come across, unfortunately, two different images. The image that we receive from the Quran and the image that we receive from Ahadith. The image that we receive from the Quran, that this verse beginning of Surah An-Nisa is one of those, clearly establishes a balanced relationship between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that gender differences are not or supposed to be interpreted as a reason for hierarchy, inferiority, or superiority. But we have it within our culture. This is there. So where did this come from? Unfortunately, the patriarchal understanding or interpretation of Quran, which should be the other way around. The hadith should be subjected to the principle of Quran rather than the Quran being subjected to the text of the hadith. So hadith has been elevated to the position of a scripture and then use it to interpret Quran. This is one of the fundamental challenges. Although we have ample evidence, from, at least within the Shia literature, that from the Holy Prophet and other Imams, clearly stating that if you see a hadith that goes against the grain and the fundamental principles of Quran, reject the hadith, but go with Quran, because that's the one which cannot be changed. There is a question mark on the hadith, on the validity of hadith, but they cannot be question mark on the verses in the Holy Quran. What we have, it's the reverse of it. The verse in the Holy Quran, at least literally quite clear, and then the hadith comes by one of, whether within the Sunni or the Shia sources, that limits the definition or interpretation of the Quran, and then commentators use those hadith to reinterpret the verse out of its context, so that they can comply with the hadith. One thing that has come as a consequence of this is that these commentators have forgotten that Islam came to establish justice, and the justice that Islam wanted to establish was balanced society. You cannot bring balanced society if there is, right from the beginning, Jahiliyyah society was patriarchal anyway. So you simply reinforce Jahiliyyah society under the banner of balanced society is not going to work. The justice that Quran talks about is a balanced justice that covers all aspects of life, including gender relationship. So any interpretation of the verse in a particular manner that does not fit with the balanced nature of Islam has to be rejected. There is a hadith from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullah salamu alayhi, ما لم يوافق من الحديث القرآن فهو زخرف. if the hadith does not tally with the nature of Quran, is hearsay, speculation. There is another hadith from the Holy Prophet, أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ مَا جَاءَكُمْ عَنِّي. If there is something that comes to you as a hadith from the Holy Prophet, يُوَافِقُ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ فَأَنَا قُلْتُهُ. If the hadith is in coherence with the principles that Quran outlines, then I have said it. وَمَا يُخَالِفْ كِتَابُ اللَّهِ فَلَمْ أَقُلْهُ. And if something that goes against the grain of the Holy Quran, then this is something that I have not said. So in contemporary interpretation and some patriarchal interpretation of the verses, purely subjected to context of ahadith, the spirit of Quran has not been observed for the sake of fulfilling some kind of ahadith that we have. This is something that we really, I think, those of you who were present during a couple of years ago, we had nearly 10 sequence of weeks discussing gender studies in Islam. You might remember the discussion at that time. But it requires a lengthy period of discussion to look at the scholarship, assess the literature, Quran, ahadith, and then come up with some kind of a more balanced response to the criticism whether Islam is inherently anti-women and prejudiced to women. There are a number of contemporary scholars, Marhum Ayatollah Sana'i, and a number of other scholars in Qom that I have been fortunate to talk to them. They insist on similar kind of approach, that these ahadith, we are required to revisit these ahadith and critically reinterpret them, because they go against the grain of the Quran and the concept of balanced society. Now, leave this issue. I just wanted to let you know that you might, particularly those of you who are academically inclined, you might come across literature that they talk about this constantly. The women in Islam, the inferiority of women in Islam, patriarchal society, interpretation of some of the verses in the Holy Quran, etc. Let's go back to the theme for tonight, and that is what happens to the women when Imam Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif returns. What's their role? Are they going to have some kind of a marginal role within the society, on the periphery, or they have a much more fundamental role within the structure that's being organized? There is a hadith, there are a number of ahadith, but this hadith is from Jabir ibn Yazid al-Juhfi, from the fifth Imam. Imam Baqir clearly states that out of the 313 individuals that they will come together to support the mission of the 12th Imam, 50 of them are women. And Imam then talks about other group of women that are resurrected within the concept or theme of ar-raj'a. So there are people that they are either very close or around the time of the contemporaries of the Imam, that they will be asked to appear in Mecca and deal with the issue, be part of the upper level management of Imam al-Mahdi that ultimately relies on them as major contributors to his success. But there are others. The hadith talks about other people that will be resurrected. These are women that have passed away, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returned them back to become active because of the role that they played during their own time. And list are at least 13 or 14 that comes within this hadith, that these are second group of women. And this group, the 50, will be designated or dedicated to major responsibilities as part of the upper management of the 12 Imam. These ones that are resurrected, part of Raj'ah, will be given what we call auxiliary role as nurses, some other people that whatever is necessary within the battles or anything else, providing services and other things that for the troops or anything else. General support as auxiliary position. The hadith talks about some of them are those that were contemporaries of Ahlul Bayt, say they saw Amir al-Mu'mineen, other Imams, and or they were killed in battle, or they were killed by Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad or Bani Umayyah. These individuals are returned as part of Ar-Raj'ah, which is the return. The souls are returned in a body, and they will be asked to deliver and assist the 12 Imam. Strangely enough, although within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the concept of Mahdi is not something that they are accepting it, but there is a hadith from Abu Hurairah that says Prophet Isa salawatullah salam alayhi, when he comes, brings with him 600 men and 400 women, so that they all go to assist the Imam in his project that he has and his uprising. And these 600 or 400 women are part and parcel of the whole upper or auxiliary position that they have. Today, I don't want to spend too much time. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. Today is the time where one has to mention the role of Sayyidah Zainab Salamullah alayha. It really baffles me when I look at how during the story of Karbala, the character of Zainab Salamullah alayha is somehow not presented the way it should. In our literature, there is a huge debate between scholars that they would consider Zainab Salamullah alayha to be the 15th infallible. They call her al-Ma'suma al-Khamis Ashar. And if you look at the literature, when Zainab Salamullah alayha began talking, Imam Zain al-Abidin calls her the person who has all the knowledge without being taught. Alimatun ghayru mu'allama. And this character is reserved only for the Ma'sumin, nobody else. And for such a character that during Ashura, from the beginning up to the end, never wavered, never complained, took her responsibilities seriously, to be presented on the day of Ashura, particularly tonight and tomorrow night, as somebody that really constantly cried and was unsure of what to do during the coming weeks and so on, complaining that in some poets and poetry, that whom do you leave us to, etc., etc. It's contrary to the nature of Sayyidah Zainab Salamullah alayha. Sayyidah Zainab was brought up in the same environment as Imam Hussein. She was younger than Imam Hussein by 1 year. And she went through the whole experience that Imam Hussein had gone through. She was the only one that Imam Hussein can trust, not only her spiritual enlightenment that Imam asks the last moment that comes in Ashura, Ya Ukhtah, my sister, don't forget me in your Salat al-Layl. This is a highly elevated position for Sayyida Zainab sallallahu alayha, that Imam Hussein asks. Imam Hussein gave the secret of Imamah to Sayyida Zainab so that when Imam Zain al-Abidin is able to stand on his feet and little bit better his physical condition, these secrets can be transferred to him. This again speaks loudly about her elevated position and lofty position. And unfortunately, like the rest of the Imams, we only discover Zainab during Ashura and post-Ashura crisis, but in the way that most speakers and the khutaba present her as somebody that constantly cried and really wasn't quite sure what to do. Today is her day. The moment that Imam Hussein was martyred, she came, and you see this, how lofty. In previous nights we talked about one of the characteristics of those who followed Ahlul Bayt during Ashura was absolute trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see this in Zainab sallallahu alayhi. On the day of Ashura, after the event, she goes to the Talla of Zainabiyya, which is, inshallah, when you go there, it's not, it's only a short distance between Talla Zainabiyya and the place where Imam Hussein was martyred. Overlooking the kind of dip in the ground, and stood there. The only thing that she said, Allahumma taqabbal minna hadha al-Qurban. Oh Lord, accept this sacrifice from us. No complaint. When we read of her story during Ashura, it's unbelievable how she was conscious not to cause anything while she came out and mourned the children of Imam Hussein and others. She never came out to mourn her own children in case Imam Hussein feels uneasy about it. And other women did the same thing. So Ashura, it's not far off if we say that Ashura has two characters that ultimately led to its success. The first phase, Imam Hussein. The second phase, Sayyida Zainab, and the rest of the women in Karbala. They worked together to take the message to Sham and expose Bani Umayyah. Then come back to Medina, or went back to Medina, to wait to see how the revolution is going to unpack itself and create the destabilization within the power base of Bani Umayyah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the privilege of really understanding Ahlul Bayt and spending some time learning about them. Without learning about Zainab sallallahu alayhi, learning about people of Karbala, we will not be able to develop. She is the role model not just for the women. She will be the role model. She is the role model for men as well. This is something that we really have to pay attention to. I would like to thank you all, those of you who were present during these nights, and ask Allah to bless you all and protect you from all harms, inshallah. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.